The internet, as we know, it is undergoing a massive transformation. Web3 is not just a buzzword, it's a decentralized, user-centric evolution powered by blockchain technology. In this video, we'll explore how blockchain is enabling true digital ownership, secure identities, and new investment opportunities. Stay tuned to see how you can be part of this groundbreaking shift. Okay, so I found this really interesting article which lays out on the table as to what blockchain technology is and how it contributes to the original concept behind Web3. Let's go through each of the sections, which I think is very important that you're aware of. So just to give a quick historical context as to what we mean by the concept of Web3 and how it influenced the birth of blockchain as we know it today. So Web3, as it says here, is the third generation of the internet. So unlike Web 1, which is read-only, and Web 2, which is interactive but centralized, Web 3 is decentralized. So if you recall, Web 1 is pretty much the notion of the web, the actual sharing information, read-only information, which is unidirectional for consumers to consume, right? Web 2, on the other hand, talks about the notion of blogs, where it's interactive information sharing, if you like, on the internet as well, but it's centralized and controlled by the tech companies that monopolized the sharing information, the editing and uploading information, whether it's blog writing, uploading videos such as these on the internet. That's what is meant by Web 2 being interactive, but still under the control of centralized security firms, i.e. companies that run these monopolies. So you've got the classical example of Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. These are all centralized companies, private companies that monopolizes the interactive nature of this information sharing, distribution, and even editing information on the internet. That is what is meant by Web 2. And then Web 3 takes it a step further, but in a different direction, in that it is decentralized. So it means that it truly empowers users instead of relying on corporations. Thanks to technologies like blockchain, that removes the need for intermediaries. So that removes the need for Facebook, YouTube, Google to run these centralized networks because blockchains are decentralized. That is the major paradigm shift where we are seeing the power that used to be governed and run by these private companies return back to the individuals under this Web3 blockchain decentralized network, which is fascinating. And that is what is meant by Web3. Now, let's quickly go through and look at blockchain technology. So blockchain is that distributed ledger system. It keeps the data secure, as it says here, transparent and immutable across a network of nodes. So these are the fundamental attributes which is shared across all blockchains, particularly in the case of public blockchain, which is where I'm mostly interested, and for me is where the blockchain can be dubbed as truly decentralized. It's when it's public blockchain in nature, because under those networks, each transaction is recorded in blocks, and once they are confirmed by a group of nodes or a group of validators, it can't be changed, making it ideal for the trustless environments of Web3. This is the fundamental paradigm shift that I made a mention earlier on. It truly revolutionizes the way we conduct and interact amongst ourselves under this public, distributed, trustless ledger system, which is very different if you compare it with a bank or a government that run their own independent ledger systems or corporate databases that are run in silos to one another, where it's completely susceptible to fraud, tampering with transactions, even unraveling them or undoing them. Well, it's not the case with public blockchains at large, as we're beginning to see here. So let's take it a step further and just run through the core principles behind the blockchain technology itself. So as I've mentioned, it's decentralized, so it enables decentralization. It's like a libertarian thought process where we are the believers of the free markets, and it's, whatever the assets and the pricing of those assets is governed by the fundamental principles of supply and demand in a free market, in a capital free market. Well, the notion of decentralization really takes it to its extreme level. in that there is no central authority that controls the system. So think like the central banks, whether it's the Fed, the ECB, the government of England or the government of Japan, when they handle these individuals that meet up once a month to discuss on the proposed decisions in this monetary policy committee meetings, where they decide on the actual interest rate cut or not the case may be, when they make this decision pronounced in the media. Well, in case of decentralized blockchains, we don't need to have this sort of collective make that decision for us. It's done under the mechanics and the mathematical and computational power that is enshrined within decentralized blockchain networks to do that for us mathematically and in a trustless manner. So we don't need to rely anymore on these central banks to make these decisions for us as to what they think should be the fund rates. We don't need that. And that is the beauty of decentralization, the beauty of blockchain technology that removes these humans, these elites. Well, we don't need them, right? Because the humans are always the weakest link in the system. So having this decentralized approach through blockchain technology removes the need for intermediaries to make those decisions. It enables, as it says here, users to interact peer-to-peer, particularly when they are conducting transactions, sending remittances or payments across a blockchain network. It enables and it certainly boosts transparency and above all removes that single point of failure. The next feature of the blockchain technology is transparency and immutability. So what do we mean by this is whenever a transaction is committed on the public ledger system in the blockchain, at that point becomes completely public to everyone, and as a result you and I can verify that fact, and importantly it cannot be altered once it's been validated by that group of nodes in the system. So that's trust without needing to trust anyone. That's the beauty of it. Now, how blockchain networks operate. So every node in the blockchain network stores a copy of the ledger. So whenever a new block is created, it's verified by consensus mechanisms like proof of work or proof of stake before being added. So this is an important aspect because this avoids, you might have heard the notion of the double spend problem or the Byzantine generals problems, where how can you assure yourself that you and you alone are the owners of the asset that you want to send out to an individual, to another person, let's say across the other sides of the world, without tampering or without creating a double issuance of that payment over the network? Well, through blockchain technology, it achieves this by, as it says here, having multiple copies of the ledger within each of the nodes participants of that network. That is how the double spend problem is avoided and removes the need for an intermediary or a clearing agency or a bank to settle the transactions. So you start to see that through blockchain or decentralized blockchains, it removes many single points of failure that we still have, unfortunately, in TradeFi. And why blockchain is certainly essential for Web3, because without it, it says here, Web3 would still rely on centralized servers, centralized institutions, centralized authorities, or financial institutions like banks, clearinghouses, wirehouses, so on. Blockchain allows for true ownership of data, secure identity management, and self-executing smart contracts. So what does smart contracts have to do here? I'll touch on that point later on. I want to just go on to stressing what are the key benefits behind blockchain technology in Web3. It enables user empowerment and data ownership. So blockchain certainly gives users control of their own data. So imagine owning your digital identity like your own house. That's clear example there. It enables decentralized identity, so you can say goodbye to logging into sites using your own email. Your wallet becomes your identity, making for safer, seamless logins. So it's like a virtual passport, the wallets, that identifies you and you alone in this blockchain ecosystem. It enhances security and trust, as we explained before. Thanks to blockchain's immutable nature, data breaches are drastically reduced. Users no longer need to trust corporations in order to keep their data safe. So the next section here is an eye-opener, and I've actually gone through most of these use cases, not all of them, and even heaps more than what we're going to see here in my other videos, which is all the more reason why you ought to subscribe to my channel in order to tap into those additional resources at your own leisure. I'm going to go through one of the typical ones that is pretty much known to the rest of the blockchain enthusiasts out there. So you might have heard about decentralized finance. What is DeFi? So anything that you can think of in terms of running your own bank, running your own accounts, running your own financial instruments or investments through a bank, through a wirehouse, that can be tokenized and decentralized on the blockchain, hence the terminology decentralized finance. It allows people to borrow, lend and trade assets without banks. So anything that you're currently doing whenever you walk into a branch in the bank, that can be conducted on the blockchain. And it's something that can be done today. The next one is a real world example, Uniswap. Uniswap is like a decentralized exchange. So if you think like Coinbase, Binance, Crypto.com, those are centralized crypto exchanges. Well, in the decentralized blockchain, there are a whole heap of DEXs or decentralized exchanges that enable users to swap crypto tokens from one another without having to rely on any middlemen through using automated smart contracts. I will touch on what are smart contracts very shortly. The other use case of blockchain or Web3 is decentralized autonomous organizations. So these DAOs are internet native organizations which is governed by code, not CEOs. Decisions are made through token holder voting. NFTs, non-fungible tokens, and digital ownership. So if you think of non-fungible tokens, they prove ownership of unique digital items, anything from art to music to virtual real estate. And then you have obviously the Web3 social platforms. So platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and so on, Instagram, those are like the Web2 centralized run social platforms. While in the case of Web3, we are starting to see the emergence of Web3 social platforms. And the examples given here are like Lens Protocol, which is one of them, allows users to own their content and move it across applications without losing followers. So again, you're starting to see that there are a growing heaps of use cases for Web3 in blockchain. And this is just a small set. In fact, there are much more commercially relevant set of use cases that are being sprouting out at the moment. And if you look into my other videos, you'll be able to dig deep into what those are. What is the role of blockchain in Web3 application development? As I mentioned earlier on, I mentioned the notion of smart contracts. Well, in the case of Web3 and blockchain development, they are the fundamental backbone. And what do we mean by that is smart contracts are none other than a set of self-executing programs that run on the blockchain and is governed by code. So if you think of a legal contract, so when you engage in, let's say, buying a property, you have to go through the notary services and settle the title deeds of the property. So that is an example of a legal contract that you and I are familiar with. Well, in the case of automating that, which contains the various terms and conditions and sort of instructions, well, you can completely automate that into what is called a smart contract and publish that program, that self-executing program, to run on the blockchain without the need of the notary to govern that. It can be governed by code under the blockchain. That is what is meant by smart contracts. They are a fundamental backbone and indispensable. And they eliminate the need for third-party enforcement, as I just explained earlier on. So that is what smart contracts are and why they play such a pivotal role in Web3 blockchain development. They also provide real-time data integrity. So because data is recorded in the blockchain, it becomes tamper-proof at that moment and becomes trustworthy, which is great for applications that need transparency to begin with. There are heaps of developer opportunities and challenges because Web3 development, as it opens new doors, it comes with learning curves. It's still a niche area with very few Web3 developers out there, which is all the more reason why I would suggest, particularly for the techies out there in my audience, this is certainly an area that I would suggest that you hone into, because this is something that we're going to be relying more and more use cases to be developed in smart contracts on these blockchains, particularly the fintechs that are being created left, right and center. Well, inevitably that's going to transcend into lots of developer opportunities and jobs in the marketplace. Tapping yourself into becoming a Web3 developer could be an interesting option for you. So the use of blockchain technology in financial services, well, it enables transparent transactions to be readily available on the public ledger, which is open to everyone to see. It's fully traceable, as it says here, and it makes auditing and compliance efforts easier more than ever before. I used to be a Big Four auditor myself, so having to inspect, let's say, transactions on the blockchain makes my life easier rather than having to resort to, let's say, the accounting departments in the organizations that I inspect and audit in order to retrieve that information for me. Well, instead of that, I can just go through the public ledger system on the blockchain in order to retrieve that information so I can inspect and perform my auditing tasks. It certainly eliminates intermediaries, so there's no need, as I said before, for any middlemen like brokers or banks to be involved anymore under this decentralized blockchain system. It reduces costs as a result and certainly speeds up transactions. Another important advantage that blockchains provide is the notion of cross-border payments. So sending money across borders is now faster and cheaper than ever before with blockchain-based stablecoins like Tether and crypto networks like Bitcoin. Right, and then I want to cover the notion of security aspects of blockchain in Web3. The one area that I would like to address as a fundamental challenge for me, because I used to program smart contracts, particularly on Ethereum network, and I've seen there's a lot of loopholes in some of these published smart contracts. So if you're going to become a Web3 developer and you're working, let's say, for a fintech that has its own public blockchain, well, this is going to be an important challenge for the company to address, because certainly we have seen a lot of hacks, and crypto exchanges have to file for bankruptcy because they either have committed fraud and sold paper tokens rather than actual tokens to the customers. Well, these smart contracts are always susceptible to be hacked, which is all the more reason why this presents a great challenge for fintech companies to address. They need to do a lot of audits. They need to have specialized third-party security firms that should perform these outside-in audits of those smart contracts to make sure there aren't any loopholes or gaps in the smart contracts before they actually publish. And also importantly, they need to write up an audit report of their findings of any new gaps that they may find to enable fintechs and Web3 developers of those companies to plug those gaps. So there is that propensity for smart contracts and the blockchain itself to be hacked. But if you do it in a normal manner, i.e. you provide quality services, you provide regular third-party security audits of those smart contracts, as and when they become rolled out into the blockchain, while you provide maximum transparency for all your consumers and participants of your blockchain to provide that fully fledged audit reports of the findings and the gaps that the companies are willing to address. So that is an important measure for me in order to address and mitigate the risk of the blockchain being hacked to begin with. And what is the future of Web3 development? Well, for me, let's say all of the blockchains in its origin still are layer 1 native blockchain layers. Like you've got Bitcoin as a classic example, you've got Ethereum. All these are layer 1 blockchain systems. Now we are starting to see a layered model built on top of these base layer 1s. We've got fundamentally the layer 2 rollups and sharding, which enable blockchains to be faster and cheaper to use, which is a fundamental improvement over and above the base layers. Why is there a notion of layers? Well, the fundamental idea behind that is to not have to interrupt the base layer itself, particularly on those blockchain systems that have amassed trillions upon trillions of dollars of worth of investment. Take the example of Bitcoin as being the main one. It's a $2 trillion network. Can you imagine if several developers were to continuously update and disrupt the base layer of Bitcoin itself whenever they want to include some new changes or new features? No, The idea is to always keep the layer 1, the base layer, intact, unchanged, and include any improvements or roll-ups, as it says here, in these layer 2 protocols. So you've got Lightning Network, which is one of the famous layer 2 in the Bitcoin network that provides, as it says here, faster and cheaper transactions, particularly for those micropayments when you, let's say, want to buy a coffee, some groceries at a supermarket. Well, you can use Lightning Layer 2 with your mobile app, Cash App of Lightning Network Layer 2, to walk into the supermarket and conduct those payments over the Layer 2 network at a much faster, cheaper rate. That is an example of a Layer 2 and what is meant by Layer 2. I've got some other videos in my channel that gives you that breakdown for you. And also the future Web3 development, particularly where we have loads of thousands upon thousands of individual blockchain networks, they're run in silos. That is the issue that they have. It's completely fragmented. So there is the improvement to make them interoperable so they can speak with one another. They can integrate and communicate with from one blockchain to another. So there is a notion of projects like Cosmos and Polkadot, which I think is the classical one, that are building bridges between blockchains for a more connected ecosystem. This makes total sense because at the end of the day, you want to open up the use cases from one blockchain to another and vice versa. And we're coming towards the end of this interesting article, and it talks about challenges and solutions. I talked about regulatory issues and having to avoid or prevent hacks from creeping into those blockchains and smart contracts within them. We've talked about that earlier on. The scalability and speed, so implementing those layer 2 rollups in the blockchain systems is going to be important, particularly when it comes to optimizing consensus algorithms. That in itself is a layer 2 rollup, and we're going to be seeing hundreds of layer 2s. There's only going to be a layer 1, which is an Ethereum or Bitcoin. Those will always remain. What we're talking about here is to provide layer 2 rollup systems that will provide those improvement mechanisms. And then lastly, the adoption barriers. So there needs to be some work needs to be done on improving the user experience, the actual user interface of these layer 2 platforms, particularly in order to educate and help users and developers alike to transition smoothly onto the decentralized blockchain. So as a final wrap up of today's important and rather interesting episode, I think you can agree, blockchain isn't just a piece of tech anymore. It's the very foundation of Web3. From secure identities and transparent financial systems to decentralized apps and user empowerment, the use of blockchain technology is indeed redefining our digital future. So, as the world shifts towards decentralization, are you ready to embrace the Web3 revolution? If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to hit the like button and share this video to friends and colleagues at work. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel, as I regularly publish some interesting videos such as these, anything to do with Bitcoin, blockchain technology, and the future of finance. So until next time,